The letter burned fast. Clara Holt held it by the corner and watched the flame take the paper from bottom to top, curling the words her Uncle Henrik had written in his careful Philadelphia hand, words she had read twice and did not need to read again. She pressed the last ember into the dirt with the toe of her boot. The ash scattered in the dry July wind and was gone before she looked away. She did not cry. She had decided that before she opened it. The platform at Harwick Station was 4 planks wide and 10 planks long, elevated maybe 18 inches above the desert scrub, and it sat at the end of a rail line that did not continue in any direction that would help her. The supply wagon that had carried her the last 40 miles had already turned back toward the main road. She could hear it going the iron wheels on dry ground, the creak of the axle, the driver not looking back. She was 24 years old. She had $12 and some change folded into the inside pocket of her coat. She had a carpentry box that had belonged to her father, heavier than her trunk, and which she had not once allowed anyone else to lift since the day she took it from his workshop in Rotterdam, Pennsylvania. And she had a scrap of paper in her coat pocket with 5 words on it. Reed Construction, Harwick, J. Reed. She picked up the carpentry box. She picked up the trunk. She started walking. Harwick, New Mexico territory, looked at her the way a man looks at a stone that has appeared in his boot, aware of it immediately, certain of what needs to happen next, waiting only for the first convenient moment. Main Street ran one direction only from the edge of the scrubland into the shadow of the Ortega Ridge, and everything built along it had been built fast, built cheap, and built to turn a profit before the next dry season made further investment impractical. The general store had a sagging porch. The church had no bell tower. The saloon had 3. Clara walked the length of it without slowing. She had learned years ago that slowing down invited the kind of attention that accumulated into something harder to manage later. She was a large woman, broad through the shoulders, full through the frame, built for work in the way that women built for work are rarely celebrated and frequently underestimated. Her hair was the deep brown of turned wheat, pinned up, practical, no arrangement to it beyond the functional. She wore her second-best dress because her best one had been ruined in a river crossing outside Albuquerque 3 days prior, and she carried the carpentry box with both hands because it needed both hands, and she was not pretending otherwise. She found the construction site half a mile north of the feedlot. She smelled it before she saw it, fresh-cut pine iron nails warming in the July sun. And beneath both of those, the sharp, clean scent of sawdust that always did something particular to the inside of her chest. Her father's workshop had smelled this way. She had spent 4 years in it learning his trade, standing at his elbow while his hands showed her things that could not be put into words. The feel of a board that was true versus one that wanted to warp the sound a joint made when it seated correctly, versus one that would fail in 2 winters. She had learned the work from the inside, and the smell of a construction site was the smell of something she understood completely. She followed it around a bend in the road and stopped. The structure was not finished. It was barely started. A foundation laid 4 walls framed out but open to the sky, the roof. Nothing yet but a skeleton of beams that the afternoon light cut through in long diagonal lines across the interior ground. Lumber was stacked along the east side of the site, sorted by length and thickness. With a precision, she noted automatically the cut lines already marked in chalk on the pieces that were ready to go up. Whoever was running this job knew what they were doing. That was the first thing she assessed, and it mattered to her more than anything else she had observed since arriving in Harwick. There was one man on the site. He was up on the east wall frame, one boot braced against a beam, driving nails, with a rhythm that did not vary and did not hurry. 3 strokes, clean set, move to the next. 3 strokes, clean set, move. He had not heard her arrive, or if he had decided the nail needed 1 more stroke before he attended to anything else. He was tall in the way that becomes apparent only when a man is in motion. Not a static height, but a working height, measured in reach and leverage, and the economy of someone who has spent years doing physical labor and has stopped being conscious of the space he occupies. Broad through the shoulders, a collarless shirt gone dark with sweat at the back. His hat pushed up on his forehead the way working men push it when they have no free hand to remove it properly. Clara set down the carpentry box. She set down the trunk. She waited. He drove one more nail. Then he turned. The look he gave her was not hostile. It was not warm. It was the look of a man who has spent enough years reading situations quickly that his face had learned to remain empty while his mind worked 3 steps ahead. He looked at her. He looked at the carpentry box. He looked at her again. "You're the applicant," he said. It was not a question. "Clara Holt," she said. "I wrote in April. You sent back a start date." A pause. He climbed down from the wall frame in 2 easy movements, and when he was standing on level ground, she understood that the height she had assessed from a distance was accurate. Well over 6 feet, moving with the unhurried deliberateness of a man for whom every step was a decision rather than a habit. He was older than she had imagined from the terseness of his correspondence, mid to late 30s, sun-weathered in the face, but not in a damaged way. Lines at the corners of his eyes. Jaw set firm beneath several days of dark stubble going silver at the edges. He was looking at her carpentry box with the expression of a man encountering something he had not fully accounted for. "You know carpentry," he said. "Not a question, a test wearing the shape of a statement." "I said I did in the letter." "Saying and knowing aren't always the same thing, Miss Holt." She unlatched the carpentry box without responding. She took out her father's marking gauge, brass-fitted, well-used, the metal worn smooth in exactly the places decades of her father's hands had worn it, and where her own hands had worn it further in the 4 years since. She looked at the lumber stack nearest to her. "Pick a board," she said. "Any thickness. Tell me what you need." He walked to the stack. He pulled a plank without deliberating. 3/4 inch from the edge. 8 inches. Clean line. She took the plank. She set it across the nearest sawhorse. She adjusted the gauge by feel, not looking at the measurement markings, because she had used this tool long enough that she knew it the way she knew her own hands, by the specific resistance of the brass against her thumb, and drew the line in one continuous pass. She handed the plank back. He looked at the line for a moment, then he looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, but the first motion toward it. The adjustment of a man who has already made a calculation and found it needs to be revised. "You can start now if you want," he said. "I want," she said. His name was Jonas Reed. She confirmed this from the sign at the property edge, Reed Construction, Harwick, NM, and from the brief functional way he said it himself when introductions became unavoidable. He showed her the framing plan without ceremony. He asked 2 questions about her experience with load-bearing versus finished carpentry. He accepted both answers with a single nod. He handed her a hammer. She got to work. By late afternoon, Harwick had noticed. Clara had a particular sensitivity to this. She had developed it over years of entering rooms where she was not anticipated, the way collective attention accumulates before it is stated, the way a situation organizes itself against you in the time before anyone speaks. She could feel the town observing from the road, men pausing in their business to look toward the construction site, a woman stopping her sweeping to watch. She did not look up. She drove nails and let them look. The rooming house was 3 blocks from the site, run by a woman named Ruth Marsh, who maintained 2 operating policies, a stated one of not asking unnecessary questions and an unstated one of asking precisely enough questions to know everything that mattered. She showed Clara to a room at the end of the upstairs hall, handed over a key and said, "Supper's at 6. Late arrivals don't get plates held." "I'll be there," Clara said. Ruth looked at her with the evaluating attention of a woman who has seen a great many people come through her door and has developed rapid and usually accurate opinions about most of them. "You're working for Reed," she said, flat like a fact being tested for weight. "Starting today. He's not an easy man." "That's fine," Clara said. "I'm not an easy woman." Something shifted in Ruth's expression. Not warmth exactly, but the first movement in that direction, the way ice shifts before it gives way. 6 o'clock, she said, and went back downstairs. Supper that evening was beans and cornbread, and the particular quality of silence Clara had learned to read over years of walking into rooms where she was not expected. 4 other boarders sat at the table. 2 cattle drivers who ate quickly and talked only to each other. A young man, barely 20, she estimated, with the careful posture of someone employed in a position requiring discretion who kept his eyes on his plate throughout. A woman in a black dress who said nothing at all but watched Clara with attention that held no hostility. Clara ate. She was hungry enough that she did not perform indifference to it. Afterward, Ruth brought coffee and sat at the end of the table. "You have people?" she asked. "Not any more," Clara said. Ruth refilled Clara's cup without being asked. "The town's going to talk," she said. "You should know that going in. It's not personal. It's just, this is the kind of town that talks." "What are they going to say?" Ruth tilted her head slightly. "That a woman like you has no business on a build site. That whatever Reed is thinking he ought to reconsider. That you came from somewhere nobody knows, and that means something." A pause. "None of it means anything, but they'll say it." Clara wrapped both hands around the mug. "My uncle used to say I took up too much room in every room I walked into," she said. "He meant it as a criticism. I've been deciding for a few years now whether to receive it as one." Ruth was quiet a moment. "How's that going?" "I burned his letter this morning," Clara said. "Progress, I think." Something crossed Ruth's face that was closer to approval than Clara had received from anyone in some time. Ruth stood, collected the remaining cups, and left without further commentary, which Clara was beginning to understand was Ruth's primary method of communicating that she had said exactly what she intended to say. The next morning, Clara arrived at the construction site before first light. Jonas was already there. He did not say good morning. He handed her a set of measurements he had taken at dawn and said, "West wall. I want the window rough openings framed before noon." "How many?" "3. I'll show you the placement." He showed her. She asked 2 questions, one about the header depth given the span, one about whether he wanted doubled or tripled studs at the corners. Both times he stopped and looked at her with that same expression she had seen when she drew the gauge line. The expression of a man revising a prior assessment without announcing that he is doing so. "Doubled," he said. "It's not load-bearing at that point." "All right," she said. By 10 o'clock, she had 2 of the 3 openings framed. By noon, she had all 3. She had also noticed, without being asked, that the eastern sill plate had a slight warp from sitting in the July heat, and she had shimmed it level before setting the studs so that the window opening would hang true. Jonas found this when he came to check the work in the afternoon. He ran his thumb along the shim where it met the plate. Flush, clean. "You shimmed the sill," he said. "It had a warp." "I know. I was going to correct it tomorrow." "I did it today." "Is that a problem?" He looked at the joint for another moment. "No," he said. "It's not a problem." He moved to the next section without further comment. She noticed, and she was a person who noticed things carefully, that his afternoon check of her work had not the quality of a supervisor inspecting a subordinate, but something closer to the way one carpenter reads another's decisions, with genuine interest in what choices had been made and why. That evening, sitting on the front steps of the rooming house in the last of the light, she opened her journal and wrote about the day. It was a habit she had developed after her parents died. She had always understood things better through writing, and she had lost the people she used to write to. She wrote about the shimmied sill plate, about Jonas Reed's expression when he found it. She wrote, "He does not say more than he means. I have not determined yet whether that is a safe quality or a dangerous one." She closed the journal and sat until the stars came out over the Ortega Ridge, listening to the desert settle into night. The trouble arrived on the 4th day, more or less, when she had been expecting it. He came mid-morning. Silas Colton, owner of the Hawick Territorial Bank, dressed in a suit that had been made for him specifically and recently moving with the ease of a man so accustomed to owning things that ownership had become simply the texture of his daily life. He had a face built for reasonableness. Square, well-maintained, the kind of face that had never needed to work particularly hard because resources had always been doing the heavier lifting. He stood at the edge of the construction site with his hands in his pockets and watched for a while before he spoke. "Reed," he said. Jonas was on the roof framing. He came down without hurrying. "Silas." "Wanted to discuss the building permit status," Colton said pleasantly. There's some question about the property line on the northern edge. Clara kept working. She did not look up. She had learned long ago that appearing not to listen was how you heard everything important. There's no question about the property line, Jonas said. I've had it surveyed. Surveys can be re-examined, Colton said, especially when there's community concern. Community concern, Jonas said, placing the phrase rather than repeating it. About the nature of the project, Colton said, and the personnel involved. A pause that had weight in it. My personnel, Jonas said, is my business. In principle, Colton said, but this is a small town, Reed. When people talk enough, talking becomes a civic matter. You understand how these things develop. Jonas said nothing for a moment. Then, how's your wife, Silas? Colton blinked. She's fine. Good. Give her my regards. Jonas turned back toward the site. I'll have my lawyer send you a copy of the survey if it'll ease the committee's concern. Colton stood for another moment, then left. Clara set down her hammer slowly. She turned and found Jonas already looking at her. He came because of me, she said. He came because he had time to fill, Jonas said. Don't let him use it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up the hammer. But her hands were not entirely steady for the next hour, and she was unhappy that they were not. Margaret Colton came on the 5th morning. She arrived with 2 women. Clara did not know younger, carrying the careful expressions of people brought along specifically to witness an occasion. Margaret herself was a handsome woman in her late 40s, dressed with a deliberateness that communicated the care was intentional with the posture of someone who has organized a significant portion of her life around being its social center and has grown comfortable in that position. She stood at the edge of the property in the way people stand when they want to be noticed without technically entering. Mr. Reed, she called it pleasantly across the site. Jonas came down from the framing without hurrying. Mrs. Colton, we were just passing for, she said, which communicated that she had come specifically. Wanted to say the build is looking lovely. You do such fine work. Her gaze moved past Jonas with practiced precision, found Clara, and settled there. And this must be your new helper. This is Miss Hoult, Jonas said. She's my carpenter. The word landed quietly in the morning air. Clara noted that he had not said assistant, had not said hired hand, had not added any qualifying language. Simply my carpenter. The 2 accompanying women exchanged a brief glance. Margaret kept her smile in place. Of course. We've all heard about Miss Hoult. A slight tilt of the head. She's not from here originally. Philadelphia, Clara said, because she was not going to stand 15 feet away and be discussed as though she were not present. Margaret looked at her directly then. Up close, the smile was more complicated than distance had suggested. Philadelphia. That is a long way to come for construction work. A brief pause that was doing work. In a town this size, we do think carefully about appearances, about the kind of example that gets set. I'm certain you understand. Clara understood precisely. She had been understanding this particular sentence her entire adult life, delivered in this particular pleasant voice by this particular category of woman. She understood that the words underneath the pleasant voice were, "You do not belong here, and I intend to make certain everyone knows it." She opened her mouth. Jonas spoke first. "Mrs. Colton," he said, "I appreciate the visit. I'll let my lawyer know you stopped by. He's been wanting to speak with someone from the property committee about the Northern Survey, and since your husband seems interested in the matter, that seems a natural starting point." He nodded, unhurried as weather changing. "You have a good morning now." Margaret's smile held for one more second. Then it went, the way all performed expressions eventually go into something flatter and more honest, which in this case was not an improvement. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said and left. The 2 women followed in silence. Clara waited until the sound of their footsteps had faded completely from the road. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I was going to answer her myself. I know that too." He picked up his pencil and walked back to the partition wall. "But she wasn't talking to you," he said. "She was talking at me through you. That's a different thing entirely." He crouched and made a mark on the floor plate. Stood. "You shouldn't have to answer for what other people are saying at someone else." Clara looked at the back of him for a long moment. She had been answering for herself in rooms full of Margaret Coltons for most of her adult life. She had built a whole architecture of defense around it, quick responses, level eyes, the particular chin-up posture that let her move through judgment without absorbing it. She had gotten proficient at this. She'd had no choice but to get proficient, and here was this man saying she should not have had to. She turned back to her measurements. Her hand was steadier than it had been after Silas Colton's visit. The next morning, no lumber arrived. A boy came instead, 12 years old, winded from running. "Mr. Reed, Garvey says he ain't delivering the pine order. Says his wagon's needed elsewhere all week." Jonas went still. One fraction of a second. Then, "Which Garvey?" "Senior. He said to tell you personally." The boy glanced at Clara with the discomfort of someone delivering information that involves the person standing beside them. "He decided this morning, right after—" He stopped. "After what?" Jonas said. The boy looked at his boots. "After Mrs. Colton came by the lumber yard." The sight held that in silence for a moment. "Thank you, son," Jonas said. The boy ran back. Jonas turned. His face was level, not fine, not at ease, but controlled with the specific quality of a man who has practiced control until it has become structural. "She moved quickly," Clara said. "She always does." "Is there another supplier? Caldwell in Mesita, 40 miles south." He picked up his hammer. "I'd need to ride out tomorrow. Puts us 2 days behind on the south wall." "She wants you to send me away," Clara said. "She's calculating that if she makes the work difficult enough, you'll decide I'm not worth the complication." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Are you?" he said. She looked at him. "Worth the complication," he said. Not unkindly, not testing exactly. More the way a man asks something he genuinely wants to know the answer to. "Yes," she said, certain and flat. The way she had said very few things in her life, but had meant every one of them. He nodded once. "Then we keep building," he said, and went back to the wall. The week that followed had the texture of things that are hard, in the way that worthwhile things are hard, rather than the way that pointless things are hard, a distinction that mattered to her. The lumber situation remained unresolved. 2 men who had greeted Jonas casually on the street found reasons to be on the other side of it. The dining room at Ruth's continued to thin when Clara walked in and thicken again when she sat down, as though her presence created a current that disrupted the existing arrangement of the room. She noted all of it. She did not mention it to Jonas because she had no interest in the conversation where he felt required to reassure her, and she had even less interest in requiring reassurance. What she noted with equal care was what did not change. The work did not change. The sight did not change. The rhythm of 2 people learning each other's working pace without discussing it, moving around the same space without collision, handing tools before being asked, reading the same structural problem from different angles and arriving at the same answer within 30 seconds that did not change. It sharpened, if anything, as the days accumulated. She noticed that Jonas checked her work each afternoon in a way that had the quality of dialogue rather than evaluation. He would run a hand along a joint check the set of a nail and either say nothing or say good, or occasionally say here, and show her a different approach to something without framing it as correction. She noticed that she had started anticipating these afternoon checks with something she was not prepared to name. She noticed on the 6th morning that he had brought 2 cups of coffee to the site and set one beside her work area without comment. She said nothing about it, neither did he. She drank every drop. On the 6th evening, the day's work done and the tools put away, Jonas came and stood beside her at the east wall of the house. The sun was going behind the Ortega Ridge, and the light was doing what desert light does at that hour, turning amber, becoming deliberate, making everything it touched look like it had always been there and always would be. He looked at the window opening she had framed, the one with the shimmied sill. He stood looking at it for long enough that she understood he had not come to evaluate the framing. "My wife chose this placement," he said. His voice had a different register than it carried when he was talking about the work. Quieter, the voice of something that has been kept in a particular place for a long time and is being brought out carefully. "She said the morning light would come through here and travel the length of the floor, all the way to the far wall." He stopped. "She measured the angles. She drew it out on paper and showed me exactly where it would land at different times of day." Clara did not speak. "Anna died before I poured the foundation," he said. 4 years ago, last February. I put the first post in the ground the following spring." He looked at the framing. "She was Dutch. Her family came from Rotterdam when she was small. She came to Harwich speaking broken English with nothing and built everything she had here from the ground up." A pause. The town never fully let her forget she was different. The weight of that settled onto Clara like something she had not known she was carrying until it was named. She understood now why the advertisement had specified Dutch speakers preferred. She understood the specific care Jonas brought to the window placements. She understood what this house was and what it cost him to come back to it every morning and continue. "She was right about the light," Clara said quietly. "The angle she chose is exactly right. Come morning, it'll travel the whole length." Jonas looked at her. Something moved through his face, brief, deep, and gone, before she could name it fully. "Yes," he said. "It will." He walked back to the tool storage and began putting things away with the methodical care of a man who has learned that the ordinary rituals of ending a workday are what hold you upright when less ordinary things cannot. Clara stood at the east wall a little longer. She looked at the window opening she had built, the shimmied sill, the squared frame, the space where glass would go and light would come through as a dead woman had calculated it would. She thought about what it meant to finish something for someone who was not there to see it finished. She thought about the specific dignity of that kind of work. She walked back to Ruth's in the cooling dark and did not write in her journal that night. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat on her knees and looked at her hands and thought about a woman she had never met who had stood in this same desert light and known with the certainty of someone who had done the mathematics exactly where to place a window. The blow came on the 8th morning. Clara arrived before Jonas. She had been arriving first for days. A private competition with herself. She could not entirely explain and was sorting through the window sash components when she found it. A document folded tucked beneath the carpentry box with the deliberateness of something placed rather than dropped or forgotten. She should not have looked. She understood that. She unfolded it anyway. The outside read, Miss H in a hand she did not recognize, formal, deliberate, the penmanship of someone who had thought carefully about what they were doing. It took her 3 readings to fully pass what she was looking at, because her mind kept trying to reject the language as something other than what it was. But the document was clear enough when she forced herself to read it slowly. A formal complaint filed with the Harwich County Property Committee. It asserted that the Reed construction project was in violation of township ordinance regarding the employment, and here the language turned carefully euphemistic, of persons of unsuitable character for public-facing skilled trade positions. Persons of unsuitable character. She read that phrase 4 times. She was still holding it when she heard his boots on the gravel. She turned and held it out without speaking. He took it. He read it. She watched his jaw tighten once briefly. And then he folded the document with the deliberate care of a man handling something he intends to put to use and placed it in his shirt pocket. "Read," she said. "If this makes the build impossible, I need to know now, not because I'm leaving, because I need to understand what I'm staying for." He was quiet for a moment that went on long enough to be a decision. "What you're staying for," he said, "is the same thing you were staying for yesterday. The work, the walls, the window sashes that still need fitting." He put his hand on top of the carpentry box and rested it there like something being anchored. "The piece of paper from Colton's committee doesn't change what we're building." "It can stop us from building it," she said. "It can try," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You've been through something like this before. Not the building. Something like what's underneath it. He was quiet longer than usual. Then, when Anna died, some of the same people who had spent years making her feel like a visitor sent flowers to the service. He paused. I'm not letting Silas Colton's wife decide what gets finished and what doesn't. Clara looked at the house around them, at the walls she had helped frame, at the windows she had built, at all the space that was becoming something real. Then we keep building, she said. He nodded. She picked up her tools and went to work, but that was not the whole of what the 8th day brought. That evening, descending the stairs at Ruth's, a voice stopped her from the lower hallway. Willie Crane, the young man from supper, who kept his eyes on his plate, who operated the telegraph office on the east end of Main Street. He was standing with his hat in both hands, with the posture of someone who has been working up to something for a while and has finally committed. Miss Holt, barely above a whisper. I don't want any trouble. I need you to know that before I say anything else. She waited. I copied a telegram this morning, he said. I'm not supposed to say what's in them. I know that, but He stopped, swallowed. It was sent by Mr. Colton to the Federal Land Office in Santa Fe. The hallway was very quiet. He's filing a formal challenge to the Reed property deed. Willie said the words, coming faster now, like something that needed to be out before the nerve failed. The deed is in the name Anna Vandermeer, Mr. Reed's wife, her name before they married. Colton is arguing that because the deed was never formally transferred to Mr. Reed's name after she died, and because the dwelling was never completed during her lifetime, the property reverts to federal disposal under territorial land statute. A breath. And then Colton applies for first purchase rights, and everything that's been built becomes part of the transaction. Clara went very still. The full shape of it settled onto her, then cold and complete. Silas Colton was not attacking the construction. He was not attacking her. He was attacking Anna. He had found the thing Jonas had done out of love, kept his wife's name on the deed because removing it felt like erasing her from the land she had chosen, and he was using it as a lever to take everything that remained. Thank you, Clara said. She said it quietly, and she meant it without qualification. Truly. Willie nodded at the floor, put on his hat, and slipped out into the night. Clara stood alone in the hallway. She pressed her palms flat against her sides. She thought about a woman who had come to a place that did not want her, had measured the light falling through a window she had not yet built, had filed her name on a piece of land, and trusted it to survive her. She thought about what it meant to have that used against everything she had built. She was going to tell Jonas first thing in the morning, and after she told him, she was going to stay. She had said as much, and she meant it. Not in spite of what Colton was doing. Not in spite of the document in her coat, or the lumber that wasn't coming, or the dining room that went quiet when she sat down in it. Because of what she was building. Because of what it was for. She went upstairs. She did not write in her journal. She lay on the narrow bed in the dark and listened to the desert settle around the town and thought about the angle of light through an east-facing window and what it would look like when the glass finally went in, and how a woman who had died 4 years ago had done the mathematics of it and trusted that someone would carry the calculation forward. Some things Clara thought outlast the people who built them. She intended to be one of them. She told him before he had set down his coffee. Jonas was already at the lumber stack when Clara arrived, taking inventory of what remained with the focused attention of a man who has learned to know exactly what he has and what he does not have at the start of every day. The July morning was still cool, that brief desert cool, that the sun would burn away before 8, and the light was coming in flat from the east, not yet the gold it would become. She walked straight to him and told him everything. Willie Crane, the telegram. Santa Fe, the name Anna Vandermeer on the deed, and what Silas Colton was building with it. Jonas did not move while she spoke. He stood with one hand resting on the top plank of the lumber stack and listened with the absolute stillness of a man who has learned that certain news requires you to hold yourself very steady or risk something breaking that cannot be repaired quickly. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He knows about the deed, Jonas said. Not to her, working through it. He's known for 4 years. He waited until you started building again, Clara said. He waited until you had something to lose. Jonas turned and looked at the house. At the walls they had framed together at the window openings at the structure that was becoming real day by day. She watched his face and saw something she had not seen before, not anger, not panic, but something older and quieter than either. The specific expression of a man confronting a loss he has already survived once and is not certain he has the same resources to survive again. "The deed is in Anna's name," he said. "Her family name, Vandermeer. She filed the original claim herself before I knew her. This was her land first." He stopped, started again. "I didn't change it after she died because I didn't want to. It felt like—" He stopped again. "Like erasing her," Clara said. "Yes. And Colton found the one thing you did out of love and made it into a door." Jonas looked at her. Then he was already moving, walking toward town, toward the telegraph office, toward the problem that needed to be solved before it solved itself in Colton's favor. "Keep the south wall moving," he said over his shoulder. "I need to get word to Mesita." "I know what to do," she said. He did not look back, but she thought she heard something different in the way his boots struck the ground. Declan Pruitt arrived the following morning. He came from Mesita, 40 miles south, which meant he had ridden through the night. He was in his mid-50s, compact, with the alert and slightly compressed quality of a man who had spent decades in territorial law and had learned that the law in New Mexico territory was made of considerably rougher material than what the Eastern schools taught. His leather satchel looked as though it had accompanied him into more territorial disputes than most sitting judges had seen. He sat with Jonas at the lumber stack and read everything: the property committee complaint, Willie's account of the telegram, the deed itself. He read everything twice. Then he folded his hands and said in a voice that was dry without being dismissive, "The Married Women's Property Act, New Mexico Territory, adopted it in 1872. Property titled in a deceased wife's name transfers by operation of law to the surviving husband. No separate conveyance document is required." "Colton knows that," Jonas said. "He does, which is why he isn't arguing the transfer. He's arguing the underlying title itself. He's claiming the original grant carried settlement completion requirements, specifically the construction of a permanent dwelling that he says were never satisfied before Mrs. Reed died." "The settlement requirements were met," Jonas said. "We filed the completion report in 1881. "I know. I've reviewed the county records." Pruitt set his hands flat on the satchel. "The difficulty is that Colton has located someone prepared to contest those records." Jonas went still in a way that was different from his ordinary stillness. "Who?" "A man named Edmund Farrow," Pruitt said. "The surveyor who conducted the original land measurement in 1881. Retired, now living in Albuquerque. Colton has apparently persuaded him to sign a declaration asserting a technical error in the original survey, filing a boundary documentation discrepancy that Colton will argue before a federal land agent invalidated the completion report at the time it was filed." The silence that followed had weight and texture. Clara had been at the south wall within deliberate earshot. She set down her tools and walked over because this concerned the work she was doing, and she was not going to stand at a distance pretending otherwise. "Can the declaration be challenged?" she asked. Pruitt assessed her with the quick, thorough attention of a man deciding rapidly whether a person merits being addressed directly. He apparently decided yes. "It can," he said, "but we need documentation that predates Farrow's 1881 survey. Something that establishes the original intent and location of the claim with enough specificity to undermine any argument about survey error." He looked at Jonas. "Did Anna's family preserve any materials from the original filing? Anything from before 1881? Jonas was quiet. He looked at the house. At the north corner, specifically the corner he had never allowed Clara to work on during the weeks she had been there. She had noticed this. She had noticed the particular resonance of the floorboards in that corner, the sound they made underfoot that was different from the boards around them. "Yes," Jonas said, "I have something." He looked at Pruitt. "Give me until this evening. I need to think carefully before I show you what I have." Pruitt nodded with the patience of a man who has learned that clients reveal things at their own pace and that pressure only delays the process. "The property committee meets Friday," he said. "I need whatever you have by Thursday morning." "You'll have it Thursday morning," Jonas said. Pruitt left. Jonas stood at the edge of the site and looked at the north corner of the house for a long moment. Then he picked up his tools and went back to work without saying anything more. Clara understood that something had been decided internally and that she would not be told what it was until he was ready. She went back to the south wall and drove nails until noon. The Friday morning of the committee meeting arrived with the ordinary texture of a day that does not announce itself as the day things change. Clara woke before the light. She dressed in her work clothes because they were what she had, and they were clean. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed for a moment with her palms on her knees. Ruth knocked at 6:30. "Meeting's at 8, she said through the door. "You going?" "Yes," Clara said. A pause. "I'll walk with you," Ruth said. Not an offer. A statement of what was going to happen. The Harwick meeting hall was a single room with plank floors and 12 rows of wooden chairs that were already 2/3 filled when Clara walked through the door. The sound changed when she entered, not stopping, but thinning the way sound thin when something moves through it that wasn't expected. She felt every pair of eyes find her in the first 2 seconds. She kept walking. She chose a seat 3 rows from the front on the aisle and sat down straight-backed, with her hands folded in her lap, and looked at the empty committee table the way a person looks at something they have a right to look at, because she had decided she did. Ruth sat beside her without being invited. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The room continued to fill with the steady accumulation of a town attending something it knew was going to matter. The mercantile owner. A pair of ranchers Clara recognized from the road. The minister whose church had no bell tower. A dozen women with the careful posture of people who had been told to attend and had done so. Howard Garvey, the lumberman in the 3rd row, looking at the floor. Silas Colton arrived at 5 past the hour with 2 men. Clara did not know. Both carrying papers, and took a seat at the front with the ease of a man who expects to be running things before long. Jonas came in at 7 past. He had a man with him, Declan Pruitt, carrying the leather satchel, moving with the deliberate alertness of someone who has ridden 40 miles and is not going to let anyone know how tired he is. Clara saw Colton register Pruitt's arrival. Saw the small, controlled stillness that passed across Colton's face at the sight of the satchel. Jonas took a seat on the far side of the room from Colton. He found Clara's eyes the moment he sat down. Neither of them moved. But something passed between them across the width of the room, the acknowledgement of 2 people who have separately arrived at the same decision and found themselves in the same place because of it. The committee chairman, a man named Burrell, tired-faced with the look of someone doing an unpleasant job he had been assigned, rather than chosen, called the meeting to order with the enthusiasm of a man walking towards something he suspects is already burning. "We're here on the matter of the Reed property," Burrell said. "Specifically a petition from certain residents regarding the deed status and a separate question of township ordinance compliance." His eyes moved briefly to Clara and away. She looked back at him pleasantly. Colton stood without waiting to be recognized. "If I may, Chairman." Burrell gestured with the weariness of a man who knew this was going to happen. "The matter is straightforward," Colton said. He had the voice of a man who had learned that power sounds more credible at moderate volume. Measured, reasonable. The voice of someone who has arranged things so that reasonableness and authority are indistinguishable. The Reed property deed was filed under the name Anna Vandermeer in 1878 and confirmed by survey in 1881. That name appears on no subsequent legal transfer document. Under territorial inheritance law, a property titled in a deceased person's name without formal transfer. "Transferred by operation of law," Pruitt said from his seat. He had not stood. His voice was dry and completely unbothered. Under the Married Women's Property Act, which this territory adopted in 1872, the deed transferred at the time of Mrs. Reed's death without requiring a separate instrument. This is settled law, not a gray area. A ripple moved through the room. Colton's reasonable expression did not change. That interpretation is debatable in cases involving disputed settlement completion requirements. The completion report was filed in 1881, Pruitt said. Still seated, still dry. I have it here. I also have the original land grant application filed by Anna Vandermeer in April of 1878, 3 years before Mr. Farrow's survey, which means any claimed error in the 1881 survey would have to exist in a document Mr. Farrow neither wrote nor has seen. I'm happy to let the committee read both, if there's any remaining uncertainty. He opened the satchel and produced 2 documents with the air of a man playing cards he has been holding since he sat down. A longer ripple moved through the room. Burrell reached for the documents with both hands. Colton pivoted. Clara had been watching for this the moment when the legal argument was no longer winnable and he shifted to a different kind of argument. She had seen it before in different rooms from different versions of the same person. The legal question, Colton said, addressing the room rather than the chairman now, is separate from the community question. His voice remained measured, reasonable, the voice of someone doing everyone a favor by being so calm about something so important. We are a small town. We have built something here, a reputation, a way of conducting our affairs, a standard for the kind of community we want to be. His gaze moved across the room and found Clara with the precision of someone who has been waiting for the right moment. I mean no personal disrespect to Miss... A pause as though the name were difficult to locate. To the young lady in question, but her presence on Mr. Reed's site has generated discussion, and in a town this size, discussion affects commerce. It affects the church. It affects our families and what we are teaching our children about how things work. He let that land. Clara sat with her hands folded and her back straight and her eyes on Colton, and she did not move. She had been in rooms like this before. She had sat in chairs like this one and been the subject of concern expressed in pleasant voices by people who had already decided what conclusion they were going to reach. She knew how to hold herself in these rooms. She had learned at considerable cost. Beside her, Ruth's hand pressed briefly on her arm. Not restraining. Present. Then a voice from the back of the room said, "What discussion?" Everyone turned. An older man was standing near the back wall, broad through the chest, slow in his movements, with calloused hands, and the face of someone who has worked land for a long time and has stopped being interested in performing his opinions. Clara did not know him. "I've been in Harwick 23 years, the man said. "I haven't heard any discussion that amounts to what you're describing, Silas. I've heard Mrs. Colton's book circled talking at the dry goods last Tuesday. That's not the same thing as community concern, and everybody in this room knows the difference." A sound moved through the assembled people, not laughter exactly, but something warmer than silence, something that had been waiting for permission. Colton's measured tone sharpened by a fraction. "Roy, this isn't the—" "You made it the place," the man said and sat back down. Burrell covered his eyes with one hand briefly. Then he looked up. "Mr. Reed, you want to say anything before we proceed to a vote?" Jonas stood. He did not look at Colton. He looked at the room, at the people in the middle rows, the people who lived here and were present because this was happening in the place where they lived. "I'm building a house on land my wife chose," he said. "She's gone. I'm finishing what we started. The woman I hired to help me build it is the best carpenter I've worked alongside in 15 years of doing this work." He paused. "I'm not here to ask anyone's permission for either of those facts." Another pause. "I was summoned. If there's a legal question, my lawyer has answered it. If there's another kind of question..." He let that rest for a moment. "Then it needs to be said out loud where everyone present can hear exactly what it is." The room held that. Colton opened his mouth. "Silas." It came from the second row. Margaret Colton's voice, not loud, not heated, but carrying the specific weight of absolute finality. She was sitting 2 seats from the end of the row, and her expression was not the practiced social face she had worn at the construction site. It was older than that face. More tired, the face of a woman who has been watching something unfold and has made a decision about her part in it. "Sit down," she said. Colton looked at her. "Sit down, Silas," she said again, quietly. with the tone of a woman saying something she has decided and will not be moved from. Colton sat down. The room was silent for a moment that had texture to it, the specific texture of a moment in which something has shifted that cannot be shifted back. The older man from the back row, Roy Colton had called him, stood again. "I move we close both matters on the record," he said. "Legal question answered by counsel, community question not established." Someone seconded it immediately. Clara didn't catch who. Burrell put both hands flat on the table like a man grateful to touch something solid. All in favor. The vote was not unanimous, but it was sufficient. Clara sat still for a long moment after it was over. She sat with her hands in her lap while the room began to empty around her and felt the specific hollow feeling that comes after bracing for something and having it not arrive in the form you feared. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The feeling of a door you have been pushing against swinging open on its own, and the stumbling that comes from the sudden absence of resistance. Ruth stood and collected her coat. "Come on," she said. "I'll make coffee." Clara stood. Jonas was waiting near the door. He did not say "well done" or "we won" or any of the smoothing over words people reach for when they want a difficult moment to feel finished. He just looked at her with those steady eyes and said, "You all right?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for another moment. "Sure." She thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "I will be," she said. He nodded. That was enough for both of them. Outside, she found the man from the back row, Roy speaking quietly with Pruitt near the door. He was in his mid-60s, she saw now, with the deliberate movements of a man who conserved energy as a matter of principle and had been doing so long enough that it had become simply how he moved. He looked at her when she came out. He had the eyes of someone who notices things and files them carefully. "Miss Hoult," he said. "Thomas Birch. I've had a place in Mesita 30 years. Knew Anna Reed since she first came to the territory." He held her gaze for a moment. "She would have done exactly what you did in there. Sat straight and let the room sort itself out." Clara looked at him. "She chose well," she said. "With the window placement. I've been building the east wall for weeks. The angle she calculated is exactly right." Thomas Birch looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Sunday dinner. My wife Eleanor insists. Both of you." He said it as a fact rather than an invitation, with the tone of a man carrying instructions he intends to deliver completely. He walked away without waiting for a response. The lumber arrived 2 mornings later. A wagon pulled up to the site carrying pine freshly milled, stacked tight and smelling of sap, driven by a man in his 60s with a gray beard and the unhurried manner of someone who has not been in a hurry for several decades. He handed Jonas a note without preamble. Jonas read it. His expression moved through something Clara could not entirely follow. He handed the note to her. "Read. My family built half the cattle operations in this county using wood your grandfather cut and shaped. This load is on my account. Don't argue with old men. T. Birch, Mesita." She looked up. "He rode 40 miles. He sat on the property committee for 12 years, Jonas said. He's been running interference since before the meeting." She thought about that. About a man who had known Anna Reed and had watched from 40 miles away what was being done to the work she had left behind and had decided quietly and without announcement to be in the way of it. "She made good friends," Clara said. "She made them," Jonas said. That was one of her particular abilities. She walked into places and people wanted to help her, not because she needed rescuing, because she made helping feel worthwhile. He was looking at Clara when he said the last part. She looked away first, which was unusual for her, and picked up her saw and made 3 cuts that didn't strictly need to be made that afternoon because she needed the motion of the work to process what she was feeling. What she was feeling was something she had not felt in a long time, like she might be allowed to stay. Not temporarily, not on someone else's terms, not until the project was complete and her usefulness was spent. Stay. She filed that under later and went back to work. Colton's next move came the following week, and it came from a direction she had not fully anticipated. Pruitt arrived at the site early on a Monday morning with the satchel and the compressed expression of a man who has received information and has been organizing his response to it since receiving it. He sat with Jonas and said without preamble, "Colton has located Edmund Farrow." Jonas set down his coffee. "Farrow is in Albuquerque," Pruitt said. "Retired. Colton has apparently persuaded him through what argument I don't yet know to sign a declaration asserting a technical error in the boundary documentation of the original 1881 survey. If that declaration reaches the federal land agent assigned to the district, and if that agent is the man Colton has already been in correspondence with the property, challenge could be reinstated at the federal level, regardless of what the county committee decided on Friday." "Who is the federal agent?" Jonas asked. "A man named Dillard," Pruitt said, "based out of Santa Fe. He has a history of findings that align with whoever has paid for his accommodations." He paused. "Colton has already arranged Dillard's hotel." The morning sat quiet around them for a moment. "What do we have?" Jonas said. Pruitt looked at the house, at the north corner specifically. "You told me Thursday that you had something. Original documents. You were going to think about it." Jonas was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked into the house and went to the north corner without looking back. Clara followed. Pruitt came after her. Jonas crouched at the north corner and pressed on two specific floorboards she could see. Now how the grain ran differently there, how the boards had been laid to be lifted, not nailed permanently, and one of them came up revealing a space beneath the floor, and inside the space a tin box. He brought the box out. He set it on the sawhorse. He opened it. Inside letters in Dutch and English, the paper aged and handled. Survey notes in a hand she didn't recognize. Careful technical the handwriting of someone who understood measurement. A hand-drawn map of the property boundaries detailed and labeled in the precise European hand of someone who had been trained to document things accurately. And at the bottom, a formal document, its heading visible before she had even reached for it. Original Land Grant Application. Territory of New Mexico. Filed April 3rd, 1878. Applicant, a Vandermeer. 3 years before Farrow's 1881 survey. 3 years before the filing Colton was attacking. The original application, predating everything he was using, describing the property boundaries in specific detail, landmarks, measurements, compass bearings, the language of someone who had gone out onto that land and measured it herself before filing her name on it. Pruitt picked up the document with the careful hands of a man who understood what he was holding. He read it. His breathing changed barely, but Clara caught it. "This is the original application," he said. "Before the formal survey. It describes the boundaries in enough detail that Farrow's 1881 survey was a confirmation, not an origination." He looked up. "If Farrow claims the 1881 survey contained errors, this document demonstrates that the boundaries were already established 3 years earlier in a document he did not write and has never seen. His claimed error would have had to exist in a prior filing he had no part in, which means it isn't a survey error. It's something else." "It's a lie," Jonas said. "It's a lie that this document makes very difficult to tell," Pruitt said. He set the application down carefully. "Read. You need to go to Albuquerque. You need to show this to Farrow directly before the declaration reaches Dillard's desk." Jonas looked at Clara. "Can you manage the site 3 days, maybe 4? She looked at him. "I've been managing this site since the first week," she said. Something moved through his face, not quite a smile, but something that had the warmth of one without the performance. "Yes," he said. "You have." He left the next morning before she arrived. When she came to the site, the coffee was there. 1 cup on the left side of the sawhorse, still warm. She stood for a moment, holding it. Then she picked up her hammer and went to work alone. The federal inspector, Dillard, arrived on the second day. He came with 2 men carrying clipboards and the specific quality of attention that belongs to people who have been sent to find something wrong and are not certain yet whether they will find it or manufacture it. He walked the site. He examined the foundation. He checked the framing, the roof, the window installations. He asked precise technical questions, and Clara answered each one with the same precision, citing measurements and load calculations and material specifications without consulting any notes, because she had not needed notes since the 2nd week. Dillard looked at the east window installation for a long time. "Who fitted the glass?" he asked. "I did," Clara said. He ran his hand along the seal. He checked the frame for true with a level he produced from his coat pocket. He looked at the result. "Cleanest window installation I've inspected in this district," he said. Not to her, to the clipboard man, but loud enough. "Put it in the official report," Clara said. Dillard looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote something on the clipboard. After they left, Clara stood in the middle of the construction site in the afternoon heat and felt something she had been bracing against, not the inspection itself, but the weight of the past 2 days managing all of it alone, and let herself feel it for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her tools and went back to work. That evening she sat on the half-finished porch and opened the letter that had arrived through Ruth 2 days before, forwarded from Philadelphia through 3 intermediate addresses over the course of nearly 4 months. It was from a man named George Holt, her father's younger brother who had left for Columbus, Ohio before she was born and whom she had met exactly twice in her life. He had been looking for her, the letter said, since her father died. He had a furniture workshop, the same trade carried into a different city. No children. The workbench he and her father had built together when they were 8 years old was still in the corner where they had always kept it. "You would not be a guest," Uncle George had written. "You would be an heir." Clara read it twice. Then she held it for a while, without reading it. She looked at the house around her, the walls she had helped frame, the windows she had fitted, the door casings that still needed to go in. She looked at the porch posts she had not yet set. She put the letter in her coat pocket and went to bed. The next morning she set the porch posts, both of them, alone. It was as she had known it would be, designed as a 2-person job. 1 person to hold the post plumb, while another set the base hardware and checked the level. She spent 2 hours the evening before working out a bracing system, temporary diagonal supports cut from scrap lumber, wedged at angles she had calculated on paper, that would hold each post in position without a second set of hands. When she came to the site in the morning, she had the system ready and she applied it with the methodical attention of someone solving a problem they have already solved in their head and are now executing in the world. It took 4 hours. It was physically demanding in a way she did not minimize to herself, though she minimized it to no one else because no one else was there. When both posts were plumb and set and the bases secured, she stepped back and looked at them. Solid. True. Built correctly. She went inside and started on the door casings. Jonas came back on the 4th day. Clara was on the porch with the linseed oil and a brush, putting a second coat on the north rail section she had not gotten to before he left when she heard the hooves. Not running a steady, careful pace, the rhythm of a horse being brought in after distance by someone who understood the difference between urgency and damage. She set down the brush and stood and looked down the road. He came around the bend in the last hour of daylight, trail-dusted hat low. He saw her standing on the porch before he reached the gate. He did not raise a hand. Neither did she. But something passed between them across that distance, the specific acknowledgement of 2 people who have been holding the same weight from opposite ends and are relieved to be in the same place again. He tied the horse at the post and came through the gate and stopped at the base of the porch steps. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. His face carried the exhaustion of completion rather than defeat, a different quality, entirely one she had learned to read. "Pharaoh withdrew the declaration," he said. Clara sat down on the porch step. Not from weakness, because the news deserved a moment, and sitting was the honest response to a moment like this. Jonas came up the steps and sat beside her in the cooling evening air. "Tell me," she said. He told her. The house where Edmund Farrow lived in Albuquerque was small and neat, with the particular orderliness of a man who had spent his working life in precise measurement and had carried that precision into how he kept his home. A good kitchen table, a window looking onto a small yard where things grew in careful rows. Farrow himself answered the door, 72 years old, thin through the shoulders, moving with the economy of someone who managed his body carefully and had been doing so for some time. Jonas had not arrived with the documents first. He had arrived with time. He sat at Farrow's table and drank the coffee Farrow offered and asked about the survey work, about what it had meant to spend 40 years measuring the territory, about the specific responsibility of putting your name on a boundary that people would build their lives around for generations, about what it felt like to know that the line you had drawn in the dirt was the line that determined where one man's life ended and another's began. Farrow had talked. He was a man who had not been asked about his work in some time, and the questions were genuine, and he talked the way people talk when they feel genuinely heard. Then Jonas had placed the 1878 application on the table. Anna Vandermeer's handwriting, the date, the boundary descriptions, 3 years before Farrow had ever set foot on that land. Farrow had read it slowly. His hands, Jonas said, were resting flat on the table, and they were not entirely steady. Then Jonas had asked one question. Not about the declaration, not about Colton, not about what it would cost Farrow to withdraw or what would happen if he did not. He asked, "Is your name something you want on a lie for the rest of the time you have?" Farrow had looked up from the document. Colton had told him the declaration was a formality. A minor technical correction to an old filing, the kind of administrative adjustment that kept land records clean. No one would examine it closely. No one would be harmed. Farrow had understood himself to be doing a small bureaucratic favor for a man with connections. He had not understood he genuinely had not known Jonas said, and Jonas believed him that the 1878 application existed. He had not understood that his correction was not a correction at all, but a deletion of something real. He had looked at the application for a long time. The specific handwriting of a woman who had measured her own land and described it with the precision of someone who intended to stand on it for a very long time. Then he had gotten up from the table and gone to his desk and come back with paper and his pen and written the formal withdrawal, himself in the same deliberate hand that had documented survey measurements across the territory for 4 decades. He had signed it with the signature that meant something. He folded it and handed it to Jonas without meeting his eyes. Then he had put his face in his hands and wept. Not loudly, not with the performance that grief sometimes reaches for. The private weeping of a man alone with what he had nearly done and had not in the end done, which is a specific kind of feeling that has no clean resolution but has at least the partial foundation of having chosen correctly when it mattered. Jonas had sat with him, had not hurried him, had not offered the smooth words that would have been cheap and wrong. He had simply stayed there until Farrow was ready to be done. After a while, Farrow had lifted his face and looked at the 1878 application again. He had said quietly, "She filed this herself." "Before I met her," Jonas said. "She came here alone. She measured the land and described it in that document and filed her name on it. She knew exactly what she wanted." Farrow had nodded. He had said nothing more. Jonas finished telling it, and they sat together on the porch in the dark that was coming down fully now over the Ortega Ridge. Clara said nothing for a while. The story had the texture of something true in the deepest sense, not merely factually accurate, but true in the way the right thing being done has a quality that nothing else quite manages to imitate. "She knew what she wanted," Clara said finally. "She always did," Jonas said. She looked at the porch posts she had set alone during the 4 days he was gone. Solid plumb, fitted exactly right. The work of one person doing what needed doing without waiting for conditions to be convenient. "The posts needed setting," she said. "That's a 2-person job." "It was a 1-person job that day," she said. "The work doesn't stop because the conditions are inconvenient." He looked at the posts for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the nearest one and put his hand on it, not checking it, not evaluating the work. Simply resting his hand on the solid wood the way you rest your hand on something you need to know is still there. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." "The interior casings still need to be finished," she said, "and we haven't started the root cellar." He turned back to her. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Declan Pruitt arrived the next morning with the satchel and the contained satisfaction of a man who has arranged something and is pleased with the arrangement. He had the withdrawal declaration. He had the 1878 application. He had, through channels he described only as reliable, a copy of Dillard's inspection report, the one Clara had managed alone, which had been filed with the Federal Land Office in Santa Fe 3 days prior, noting the Reed construction project as the most structurally sound build inspected in the district that calendar year. Clara had told Dillard to put it in the official report. He had. Pruitt laid the documents on the carpentry box and looked at Jonas with the expression of a man presenting arithmetic. "Colton has no survey error. He has no supporting witness. He has an inspection report that directly contradicts his claim that the settlement conditions were never met." He paused. "What he has remaining is a letter with his name on it and nothing else behind it. The federal claim collapses on its own within 30 days. Thomas Birch has confirmed the property committee will formally close the local matter by end of week." He closed the satchel. "It's over in all the ways that matter now." After Pruitt left, Jonas and Clara stood in the construction site in the morning light and said nothing for a while. The site looked different than it had 8 weeks ago when she had first come around the bend and followed the smell of sawdust to this place. The walls were closed. The roof was on. The glass was in every window, each pane fitted sealed, sitting true in the openings that had been framed and squared and shimmied before anyone asked for them to be. The house was nearly finished. "Interior casings today," Jonas said. "And the remaining door hardware," Clara said. "And that second coat of linseed on the north porch rail." "I'll do the porch rail," he said. "I'll do the casings," she said. They went to work. Eleanor Birch arrived that afternoon. Clara saw her coming up the road from inside the house through the east window, the one that faced the direction Anna had known the light would come from. A small woman, straight-backed, white-haired, with eyes that had the quality of someone who had decided somewhere around 60 that she had earned the right to say precisely what she thought, and had been exercising that right consistently since. Clara came out onto the porch. Eleanor stopped at the gate and looked at the house, the way people look at something they have been imagining for a long time and are now seeing with their eyes. She looked at it for a full minute before she looked at Clara. "Liesel Anna," she said, correcting herself with the small wince of a woman who knew the woman by one name and had to remember the other. She would have stood on this porch and known it was right. She came through the gate. "I'm Eleanor Birch, Thomas's wife. I know who you are," Clara said. "Please come up." They sat on the porch together in the afternoon light, and the silence between them was comfortable in the way silence is comfortable between people who have both decided to be honest. Eleanor looked at the east window for a long moment. "She showed me the drawing," Eleanor said, "when she was still planning it. She came to my kitchen table with paper and a pencil, and she showed me exactly where the morning light would go." She paused. "She said the whole point of a house was what happened inside it, and the whole point of a window was to remind you the world was still out there." "She was right," Clara said. "She was right about most things." Eleanor looked at her directly then, with the uncomplicated attention of someone who has stopped performing her assessments. "You're thinking about leaving." Clara looked at her. "I haven't decided anything." "I know. That's what thinking about it looks like." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "There's an opportunity somewhere else." It was not a question, but Clara answered it anyway. "Ohio, my father's brother, a workshop." She paused. "It's a real opportunity. Is it what you want?" There it was again, that question, the one that kept reaching her from unexpected directions. "I'm not certain," Clara said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I watched Jonas Reed close himself off after Anna died," she said. "The way a house gets shuttered for winter. 4 years. He worked and he waited, and none of us could understand what he was waiting for." She paused. And then he put an advertisement in a newspaper asking for someone who could tolerate heat and spoke Dutch. Clara's hands went still in her lap. He wasn't looking for a carpenter, Eleanor said. He needed a carpenter. The carpenter was the form the thing took. From around the side of the house came the sound of Jonas and Thomas talking the easy, unhurried shorthand of old friendship, the kind where the words are placeholders for things already understood. Clara listened to the specific register of Jonas's voice and felt something that had been filed under later for 8 weeks quietly and completely refused to stay there any longer. He's going to ask me to stay, Clara said. Not a question. When the house is finished, Eleanor said. Yes. What do I say? Eleanor picked up her coat from where she had set it on the porch railing. She looked at Clara with the patient expression of a woman waiting for a younger person to arrive at something the older woman can already see clearly. What do you want to say? She asked. Clara looked at the house. At the trim she had fitted at the window Anna had placed at the porch posts she had set alone at 8 weeks of work, that bore her decisions in every surface, not because she had claimed it, but because she had shown up every morning and done what needed doing. She looked at all of it. I want to say yes, she said. Eleanor smiled, not the smile of a woman who is surprised, but the smile of a woman who is satisfied. Then say yes, she said. She stood, put on her coat, and went to find her husband. Margaret Colton came the following afternoon. She came alone. No carriage, no companions, no social occasion to attach to, a plain day dress. She came on foot up the road in the mid-afternoon, and Clara saw her through the east window and came out onto the porch before she reached the gate. Margaret stopped at the gate and looked at the house, at all of it. The completed walls, the glass in the windows, the porch posts, the finished structure of what had been a skeleton of beams 8 weeks ago. She looked at it for a long time before she looked at Clara. I won't take much of your time, she said. Come up, Clara said. Margaret came through the gate and stopped at the base of the porch steps and did not come further. She looked at Clara directly with a face that was not the practiced social face from the construction site, not the pleasantness that had functioned as a weapon. This was the face of a woman who has sat with something for long enough that the performance has worn away, and what is left is simpler and harder. I owe you an apology, she said. I have owed it for some time, and I have been finding reasons not to deliver it, which tells you something about me that I'm not comfortable with. Clara waited. The lumber supplier, Margaret said. The property committee complaint. The things I said in front of people who were going to repeat them. She said each one flatly without flinching from it. I did those things knowing they were wrong. The knowing while doing is the part I can't reduce to something smaller than it was. What changed? Clara asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Eleanor Birch came to my parlor last week, she said. She sat at my table and told me about Anna Vandermeer, about a woman who came here from the other side of the world speaking broken English, who measured her own land and filed her own claim and built everything she had from nothing, who died in this town after 4 years without ever being made to feel she was genuinely welcome in it. She looked at the east window. Eleanor asked me very politely whether I wanted to be the kind of woman who did that twice. The words settled into the afternoon air and stayed there. I didn't want to be, Margaret said. I didn't want it when Eleanor asked, and I don't want it now. She looked at Clara. I knew a woman like you once. She came from somewhere far away and didn't look the way people here expected, and was worth more than anyone gave her credit for. I should have remembered that. I did remember it too late, and after I had already made the same choices the people who failed her made. Clara looked at her. She looked at this woman who had organized a social machinery against her without knowing her, who had used every tool available to a person of her position to make things harder. And she saw behind all of it a woman who had built her life in the rooms available to her, and had used those rooms as her territory because they were what she had, and she had not known how to want something different. I hear you, Clara said. Not warmly, not coldly, straight. I'm not going to tell you it didn't matter because it did. It made real things harder, and that cost real time and real effort. She paused. But I'm not going to carry it as a permanent weight against you. I don't have room for that kind of thing. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "That's more than I came expecting," she said. "It's what I have," Clara said. Margaret nodded. Not with relief, she did not look relieved, and Clara respected that. Being heard was not the same as being absolved, and Margaret seemed to understand that. She had come to give something, not to receive something. She had given it. She left the way she had come through the gate and back down the road, and she walked with a slightly different posture than she had arrived with. Jonas appeared from the side of the house where he had been finishing the linseed coat on the south rail. He had heard. He had the look of a man who had chosen not to interrupt something and was at peace with that choice. "She came without the peaches," Clara said. He looked at her. "I thought she might bring something," Clara said, "as a social gesture, to make it feel like a neighborly visit rather than an accounting." Would that have been better? She considered it honestly. "No," she said. "She came without them. That was the right way." She picked up her tools. "The casings are almost done. I want to finish the bedroom door frame before we lose the light." He went back to the porch rail. She went back inside. She wrote to Uncle George Holt that evening. She had been carrying it, the letter he had sent and the answer she owed him for weeks. She had read his 3 times when it arrived and had kept it close while she was still deciding. Now she took it out and held it and then set it aside and wrote her answer from what she knew. "Dear Uncle George," she wrote, "thank you for finding me. The finding itself matters separate from what comes next. I am glad to know the workbench is still standing. I am glad to know you exist and that you thought it was worth the effort of looking. I cannot come to Ohio, not because your offer isn't real. It is real, and it is more generous than I had any reason to expect from anyone. I understand what you are offering, and I am grateful for it in a way that is difficult to fit into a letter. But I have built something here that I am not finished with. Not only the building, though, the building is real and good and very nearly done. Something larger than that. I have found work that means something. I have found a place that is beginning to hold me. I have found a person who asked me what I wanted just that plainly, without telling me first what the answer should be, and waited for an honest answer. I did not know until recently that those things were different from simply being useful somewhere. Now I know the difference. My father used to say that a piece of furniture is honest because it either holds or it doesn't. I think he would recognize what I am building here as the same kind of work. If you are willing to write again, I would like to know you. And when the season turns, perhaps you might come west. I could show you what New Mexico territory looks like in the fall and tell you about the man who taught me that a good workplace smells the same in any language." She folded the letter. She addressed it. She set it by the door to be posted in the morning. She did not put it in her journal box with the letters she had never sent. For a long moment she sat and felt the difference between those two things. A letter placed at the door going somewhere, and all the letters that had gone into the box over the years. Letters written to people who were gone, letters that kept her company in the spaces where other things should have been. She looked at the box. She closed it, set it on the shelf. She slept without writing anything else. It was the first night in 4 years that she had not needed to. Thomas Birch delivered the final word on a Tuesday morning. He came to the construction site with the unhurried manner of a man who has been waiting for the right moment and recognized it. Jonas and Clara were working on the last of the interior door casings, she measuring, he fitting the corner blocks. The two of them moving around each other with the ease of people who have stopped wasting motion. Birch came through the gate and waited until Jonas looked up. Then, "Federal Land Office dismissed Colton's claim this morning. Official notification from Santa Fe." Jonas set down the corner block. Without Farrow's declaration and without a technical finding, there was nothing behind the challenge. The 1878 application document settled the question of original intent and location. Birch paused. Colton's lawyer told him 2 days ago that an appeal would cost him 2 years and more money than the land is commercially worth to him. Colton is, a brief pause, selecting the word, reassessing his priorities. "He'll appeal anyway," Jonas said. "Probably," Birch said. "For a while. Then he'll do the arithmetic. He looked at the house, at the completed walls, the fitted windows, the solid finished structure. She would have had opinions about the door hardware, he said. She had opinions about everything, Jonas said. Birch smiled genuinely, the smile of a man remembering someone specific. Eleanor says she was impossible to argue with once her mind was made up. She was right most of the time, Jonas said. That made it considerably worse. Birch looked at Clara then with the direct assessing attention of a man who has been watching carefully and has arrived at conclusions. You held the site together while he was in Albuquerque, he said. The inspection report reflects that. I told the inspector to put it in the official record, Clara said. I know, Birch said. I read it. He put his hat back on. Sunday dinner, both of you. He walked back through the gate without waiting for a response. Jonas looked at Clara. Both of you, he said. Both of us, she agreed. That'll be known to everyone in town by tonight. Thomas told Eleanor the moment he left here, she said. Eleanor has already told everyone she considers worth telling. Eleanor considers most people worth telling. He looked at her. Does that concern you? She thought about it. About the dining room at Ruth's that had gone quiet when she walked in and had slowly over weeks stopped doing that. About Willie Crane, who had risked his position to tell her the truth on a staircase in the dark. About Margaret Colton walking back down the road without the relief of forgiveness, but with the different thing, the truer thing of having been honestly heard. No, she said, it doesn't concern me. They went back to work. She finished the last door casing on a Wednesday afternoon. She knew it was finished the way she always knew. True things, not with fanfare, not with announcement, but with the quiet settling of a fact that has been becoming true for a long time and has finally arrived completely. She ran her hand along the last piece of trim around the bedroom doorway. The joint where it met the corner block clean tight exactly right. She set down the plane. She stepped back. She looked at the room. It was a good room. Not large. Not decorated. Proportioned correctly with the ceiling at the height she and Jonas had argued for and then agreed on, and the east window where Anna had placed it, and the trim fitted with the precision her father had taught her before his hands gave out and the world took everything else. The kind of room that would hold a life in it. The kind of room that did not need to be anything other than what it was. She heard Jonas's boots cross the porch. He came through the doorway and stopped. He looked at the trim. He looked at the ceiling. He ran his own hand along the casing, the same motion she had made 2 minutes before. Independently, the same instinct. She watched his face do what it did when something was exactly right, that slight involuntary pause in all the forward motion, the acknowledgement of a thing done well. That's it, he said. That's it, she said. Outside, the September light was coming in clean and angled the fall light of the high desert, honest without the punishing weight of summer, clear about the distance it had traveled. Through the east window it fell across the floor in exactly the stripe Anna had calculated. From the sill to the far wall, the full length of it. The light a dead woman had planned for that Clara had built the path for arriving at last where it had always been intended to go. Jonas looked at it for a long moment. She would have stood right here, he said. I know, Clara said. Neither of them moved. They stood in the morning light, that Liesel that Anna had designed for a house she never got to live in, and the moment had a weight that Clara did not try to lighten because she was learning that not everything heavy needed to be put down. The porch rail took the rest of the afternoon. When it was done, when the tools were put away and the site was quiet. In the September evening, Jonas came and stood at the edge of the porch. He reached into his coat pocket. He took out a key. Small, plain iron, the kind a locksmith makes for a door that gets used every day. No ornament, no excess, simply the functional shape of a thing that opens something. He held it out. Clara looked at it, then at him. The house is finished, he said. Near enough, she said. I told you I'd ask again when it was finished. You did. He held the key steady in the evening light. Stay, he said. Not as my carpenter. Not on a contract with an end date attached to it. Not until the next opportunity presents itself or Ohio starts looking like the better answer. He was choosing each word with the same care he brought to every measurement, nothing wasted, nothing imprecise. Stay because this is where the work is, and you know what the work is for. Stay because you shimmed a sill plate before anyone asked you to, and you have been doing the same thing in every direction since your first morning. Stay because you set those porch posts alone and didn't mention that it was hard. A pause, the evening quiet around them. Stay because I brought 2 cups to the site and I don't want to go back to one. She looked at him for a long moment. This man, who had handed her a hammer on the first day without making any of it more complicated than it needed to be. Who had stood between her and Margaret Colton and said my Carpenter with the same steadiness he drove nails 3 strokes clean set certain. Who had kept his dead wife's name on a piece of land because love does not require erasure to move forward. Who had sat at a table with a 72-year-old man and asked one question and waited while the man found his own way to the answer. That last part, Clara said. I mean, all of them, he said. I know you do, she said, but that's the one I'm going to remember. She took the key. It was warm from his hand. She closed her fingers around it and felt the weight of a plain and honest thing, just iron, just the actual physical weight of a key that opened an actual door, and something that had been wound very tight in her chest came loose so quietly she almost missed it. Yes, she said. He looked at her the way a man looks when he has been traveling towards something for a long time and has recognized the destination, not surprised, not triumphant, arrived. There's still the root cellar, he said. I know. And the north pasture fencing, and the outbuilding hasn't been started. She looked at the property in the failing light, at all the work still ahead, the work she was no longer calculating as a list with a final item, but as something ongoing, something that would keep becoming what it was meant to be. The root cellar drainage is going to be a problem if we don't address the grade before we dig. I know, he said. I've been thinking about it. The north side runs toward the foundation. We need a diversion channel cut east before we break ground on the cellar itself. Adds a day, but it's the right sequence. Show me what you're thinking, he said. She showed him, sketched it in chalk on the porch boards between them, the grade, the channel, the angle of diversion. He crouched and looked at it. He asked one question about the depth at the outlet point. She answered. He said, that'll work, with the conviction of a man who knows the difference between a solution that is merely adequate and one that is right. She felt that settle in her chest the way good things settle quietly and all the way down. He stepped forward and took her face in both hands with the careful deliberateness of a man who has thought about something long enough that all the hesitation is gone, and he kissed her once certain and unhurried. She held still for one breath, then she kissed him back. When they separated, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, then she opened them and looked at him in the evening light. The drainage channel, she said. He laughed. Fully this time, a real laugh, the kind that changes a man's face completely and shows you who he was before the hard years arranged themselves on top of it. The drainage channel, he agreed and let her go. She walked back to Ruth's in the dark and thought about Anna Vandermeer, who had walked into a town that did not want her and had measured the light and filed her name on a piece of land and trusted it to survive her. Who had made friends the way a good craftsman makes furniture, honestly practically built to actually hold. Some things get finished by the people who come after. Some light comes through windows that someone else planned, and someone else fitted the glass for. That was not a lesser thing. That was... Clara thought the whole point of building anything at all that it would outlast the hands that built it and go on doing what it was built to do. She went inside. She posted the letter to Uncle George on the way. The news from the Federal Land Office arrived officially on a Thursday, confirmed in a formal letter delivered to Declan Pruitt in Mesita and forwarded to Jonas by the afternoon stage. The claim was dismissed. The property was clear. Silas Colton had 30 days to file an appeal, and his own lawyer had reportedly advised him against it. Ruth Marsh heard about it before the letter arrived through channels Clara had learned not to question. She set an extra slice of pie at Clara's place at supper, without comment, which was Ruth's way of celebrating, and said nothing about it, which was also Ruth's way. The following morning, Clara arrived at the site before first light. She always arrived before first light now. It had been true since the second week, and it was true still, and she had stopped pretending she didn't know why. The site was quiet. The house stood in the pre-dawn grey solid and finished the east window facing the direction the light would come from. She set down her carpentry box. She stood in the doorway of the main room and felt what she had felt when she pressed her hand to the finished door casing and knew the work was done, the physical fact of a thing built correctly. Not perfect. Right. The difference her father had taught her to feel before she knew how to name it. Either it holds or it doesn't. This held. She heard boots on the gravel. She turned. Jonas came around the corner of the house with 2 cups of coffee, one in each hand. He stopped when he saw her standing in the doorway. He looked at her standing there in the first grey of morning. She looked at him standing there with the cups. He came up the steps and handed her the left one. She took it. The coffee was hot. She wrapped both hands around it the way she had wrapped both hands around Ruth's cup on her first night in Harwick in the dining room, where the silence had a particular quality, and she had not yet understood anything about this place or what she was building here or what it would cost her and what it would give her in return. Everything, it turned out. It turned out it would give her everything. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The grey thinning at the edges, the first suggestion of gold above the Ortega Ridge. "The diversion channel today," she said. "North side," he said. "Starting at the corner." "I'll get the spades," she said. "I'll check the grade first." "I already checked it," she said. "Yesterday before I left." He looked at her. "It runs 3 degrees toward the foundation," she said. "We cut east for 12 feet, then divert at a 45. Outlet to the arroyo on the property edge." "That's exactly what I was going to say," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that had replaced all the careful blankness of the early weeks. Something open, something that had been waiting a long time for the conditions that would allow it. "I'll get the spades," he said. He went around to the tool storage. She stood in the doorway with her coffee and watched the light come. It came the way Anna had said it would. Through the east window across the floor she had fitted plank by plank, traveling in a long, warm stripe from the window glass to the far wall, filling the room with what it had always been meant to hold. The light that a woman who was gone had calculated and planned and trusted to arrive. The light that Clara had built the path for without knowing on her first day. That was what she was doing. She stood in it for a moment. She let it be what it was. Then Jonas came back with the spades, and she stepped off the porch and she took the one he held out, and they walked together to the north side of the foundation where the work was waiting. She set the blade of the spade to the earth and pushed it in with the full weight of her body, and began. Behind her, the house stood in the September morning, solid and finished and full of light, exactly as it was always meant to be, holding everything that had been built into it and everything that was still to come, anchored in ground that had been measured and claimed and trusted to survive by a woman who had known exactly what she wanted and had written it down. Clara Holt drove the spade in again and again, steady, sure, all the way down. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was never leaving.